Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for surviving the after lunch. And I'm sure the reason we have a lot more people than I thought we'd have is because it's probably cooler in this room than it was in some of those others. But thanks for coming today. My name is Bruce Moeller. I work for the Federal Acquisition Institute. My colleague and I, Tim Whalen from Homeland Security, we're going to talk to you about a topic that's actually been around for quite some time, but it's had some modifications. You can probably tell by our attire who represents the old and who represents the new. The bow tie is the new, if you didn't figure that out, okay? But I see a gray bearded young man out there that has a bow tie on as well. At FAI, I normally talk about the Federal Acquisition Certification Programs, because that's what FAI normally does. We support the acquisition workforce, working for the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, as well as we're assigned to GSA to assist and develop the whole acquisition workforce certification process and policy and so forth. So today I get a chance to actually talk about a real project and or program management topic, okay? And I work with Tim on the Project and Program Management Functional Advisory Board, which are actually the gatekeepers of all the competencies for your federal certification in program and project management. And that's why he and I actually get along. We've worked together long enough that, yeah, we disagree on a lot of things. We agree on some other things, and we actually get along. So that's why I'm up here today. So without further ado, integrated teaming. Integrated teaming has probably become a resurgent sort of topic due to the integrated teaming and multidisciplinary nature of the Agile process, whether it's the pure Agile process for developing software or you're applying the Agile Manifesto sort of principles to project and program management in general. But lo and behold, maybe even before some of the Agilists were even born, the process called integrated product and process development came along over 20 years ago, okay? And this is a definition of it, but it is really how you bring together all of the functions all at once as early as you can in the life of a project or a program and interact together as early as possible so that change down the road after the product has been developed doesn't cost you so much. And this came about, remember now, 20 years ago when we didn't think in a spiral fashion. We thought very much waterfall, okay? And the integrated product team is the conglomeration of folks that come together and use this IPPD process, if you will, to get that function done, okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit about what was there before this thing we called integrated teaming. And just for curiosity's sake, a little bit of history about it. The Japanese employed it actually back in the late 60s, but it really took off in the 70s, if you remember, if some of you can remember. Some of you probably weren't born yet. But in the 1970s, the Japanese automaking industry had a huge boon in quality. And they really started to give U.S. automakers a run for their money. People were buying Toyotas and Datsuns instead of Fords and Chevys because they were just a better quality car. They weren't in the shop longer than they were on the road, okay? And it's because the Japanese employed something that they called quality circles at the time. And that was really nothing more than anybody in the company, from the very top CEO executive to one of the lowest workers down on the manufacturing line in a Japanese automaking company, could stop the line if they saw something going wrong with quality. So they had business people working on the same level as the engineers, working on the same level as the manufacturers, working on the same level as the assembly line workers, they would all come together in these quality circles and discuss the problems and the issues. And that's how they gave the U.S. automaking industry a run for their money back in that early time. U.S. compensated. Detroit said, okay, we can do the same thing. We can come up with something called integrated design and concurrent engineering, and we can get back the market share that we've now lost to the Japanese automakers. And they did just that in the 1980s and in the 1990s and even in current day. But in 1995, at that time, Defense Secretary William Perry says, okay, in DOD, this is the way we're going to do business. He instituted it as the formal process, IPPD, for fielding weapon systems in DOD. And these three references came out. And if you probably can't see them very well, but the reference on the left is dated October 1999. The one in the middle is dated August 1995. And this one is probably the best one of all, done by the Center for Naval Analyses. It's dated October 1996. If you put integrated teaming, or IPT, in the Google search window, this is like the second or third hit. It hasn't been updated because much of this stuff still applies today. A lot of it has been transformed. A lot of it has been reshaped. But the basic principles of this concept of integrated teaming still hold true. And these are really still your primary three references for this. Okay. Why did it come about in the first place? Anybody ever heard of the term stovepiping? I see some north and south nods out there. I started out my project management career, acquisition-related career as an Army guy in 1986, okay, prior to the institution of IPPD by Secretary Perry. And we had stovepiping was rampant back then, where, say, the design team took the design for a new piece of equipment, and they literally threw it over the wall to the logistician who looked at the design, then got to change it all around, which cost money and time, in order to be logistically supportable. Then they'd throw it back over the wall to a contracting officer who had to now figure out how to put all this stuff on contract because you had a constantly changing requirement. Contracting officer would throw it back over the wall to the business person who now has to go out and find the budget, penetrate the president's budget, every year. The president's budget is a very linear process, and it remains a linear process. It's calendar driven. Okay, the president's budget has to follow in the steps of Congress by the first working Monday of every February, no matter what. So this constant throwing stuff over the wall or the stovepipes, okay, those changes and all those changes to the design and the life cycle of the project were done in isolation of one another. And so if you follow the dash dot line, you can see that when designs became solidified and they had to change right about in the middle of their life cycle, it cost a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to change production lines. It costs a lot of money to take a widget off of something and put a new widget on it, okay? And then even later down, after it would get into the field, the cost of those changes were still high. Whereas if you follow the small green line there, using an integrated product team approach, a lot of the changes are worked out very early on in the concept phase and early design phase when it's cheaper to make the changes. Less changes occur during testing and production. Very little change occurs down in operations and support. And then if you follow the cost line, if you did costing the way that you did the serial approach or the stovepiping approach, the cost was exponential. It drove cost up. Going to the integrated approach drove the cost down. And that's the reason we went that way, okay? And that's the reason we're still performing that way, okay? How many folks here have either run or served on an integrated team of some type? There's a lot of hands in the audience, that's right. So it's very institutionalized now, even in the federal sector, not just in DOD. However, I think what has happened in that institutionalization over the last 20 years, some of the basic tenets that integrated teaming were founded upon have, for lack of a better term, have been lost in translation of their original intent. And that's what I'm going to try and bring out today. Tim, hopefully, Tim is going to blast me out of the water with a lot of it, okay? At least to generate some questions from you all about the way Agile is done, okay? So those key tenets of, the original key tenets of integrated teaming still hold some merit today. You always want to focus on what the customer wants. That hasn't changed much. Multifunctional, we want to bring together, we want to bring together the technical folks. We want to bring together the requirements folks. We want to bring together the product support, the logisticians. We want to bring together, for sure, the contracting officers, okay? And we'll bring together them all the time on whatever you're bringing them together for, whatever product you're going to produce, whatever process you're going to come up with that ultimately leads to a product. You bring them together all at once and work out those issues and drive those issues down to the absolutely lowest possible level where they can be decided upon and resolved. And that reduces cost. It takes a lot of time up front, but the cost in time and the cost in dollars down the road is much less if you use the integrated approach. Concurrent development, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. One of the big ones there is empowerment. I'm going to talk a little bit more about empowerment a little later on, okay? And I think some of those are other kind of self-explanatory. And that last one down there is kind of curious, the use of management tools. Remember, this was 1995. What kind of electronic management tools did we have in 1995? We had email. We had video teleconferencing, but a video teleconference in 1995, you had an outfitted room almost like this, with a back room full of lights and servers and stuff, and a technician that had to run it for you in order for you to connect via teleconference maybe to 2 or 3 other remote locations that had a similar teleconference facility. Now, hold up your smartphone. You can teleconference over your smartphone with FaceTime. You can teleconference, I mean, there's a camera on this laptop right here. So the management tools thing still holds true, it's just changed a little bit, okay? You can still use management tools and bring that concept forward as it was originally talked about in those 3 references I pointed out. The integrated teaming has got good points, bad points. You got less overall project time and costs compared to that serial approach, that stovetype sort of approach, okay? And you get a contracting officer serving on an IPT that's supposed to come out with an engineering design. Guess what? The contracting officer gets real sensitive and understanding of the system engineer's point of view. That contracting officer may have not gotten that perspective had he or she not served on an IPT, okay? I was a project manager, program manager. I never really got a good appreciation for what the contracting officer had to go through, okay? Especially with pre-solicitation sort of admin type functions, until I actually had them on IPTs and they were telling me, wait a minute, that takes a little bit longer to get on a contract than you think, okay? So your members get a little bit of cross-training when they serve on these integrated teams. And of course, the buy-in factor is right up front and early, okay, instead of later on. There are some bad points. There are some things that integrated teaming just won't work on. If you're very short of time, if it's urgent, okay, if it's a simple sort of thing, maybe a commercial buy, integrated teaming probably is not the way to go, okay? They have a tendency to turn into committees. And what I mean is, this has to do with this concept called empowerment. People will attend your IPT, but they can't speak for their agency or they can't speak for their office. They can't make decisions on behalf of their office because they have not been empowered by that office lead, okay? And all they are is note takers when they come to your IPT. And just to give you a little story, I was running an IPT once, and at the very first meeting showed up, and the first thing I asked every single person after they introduced themselves and where they came from, I asked them, are you empowered to make decisions on your office's behalf? Everybody raised their hand except one person. And I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't use you on my IPT. You're wasting my time and your time. He got up and left. He got the message. The next day, my business finance person came running into my office and said, Bruce, our budget has been zeroed out. The person I dismissed was from the comptroller's office. So that wasn't the way to endear that particular person. And now we have something, a concept that is probably more in the times. It's called tailored empowerment. I'll talk a little bit about that. And like I said, it may not be a good fit for all situations when time is critical, okay? Another thing has to do with the organizational relationships. It's along a full spectrum. Picture yourself as the project manager, new project coming along in your agency, and you want people. You need people. You need a systems engineer. You need a contracting officer. You might need a logistician. You might need a software expert. You might need a scrum master, okay? Where are you going to get these people? And when you do get them, what is your relationship with them? What kind of prerogatives do you have with them? What kind of authorities do you have with them? Do you actually get to have input on their performance appraisal or not? Okay? So this full spectrum of organizational relationship goes from complete participation, but you have no control of these folks whatsoever. The same person may or may not show up at the IPTs meetings, all the way down to formal assignments such as a project management organization that's put together specifically to produce a product and then is disbanded, kind of like a detail, okay? And then there's something in the middle we call matrix control, and that's pretty much the most common one these days, where under the functional areas, as this sample shows, you got a research and development area, you got a quality control, you have people that work in those areas, and Project A goes across all those, and with some relationship and some memorandum of agreement is able to draw personnel resources from each one of those functional areas, okay? An example that employs sort of an agile approach is this, and really the main agile aspect about it is a scrum master, if you're lucky to have one of those, okay? They do fail. Believe me, I've run them and I've failed. I've had successes and I've had failures. I've seen some things that work, I've seen things that don't work, and I've seen things that should be thrown back in the theory pile. But if you don't have a charter, something in writing, it's something about a written document that people put their signature to, it still carries a lot of weight today. The charter lays out what the nature of the mission is of that particular integrated team, how you're going to interact with one another, how you're going to vote on things, how you're going to drive this elusive concept called consensus, okay, which is hard to do. And it's laid out in a fairly simple, fairly straightforward, don't make it complicated sort of charter, and main stakeholders sign it, okay? It carries a lot of weight. Carries a lot of weight still. Empowerment issues. If people come to your meeting and they're not empowered to make decisions, or they don't bring with them a tailored empowerment agreement from their boss, which basically says this person is empowered to make these types of decisions within this amount of scope, and when it gets up to this amount of scope, you got to bring that one back to me. That's fair. That's fair. When you know how much decision authority your team members have, okay? Stakeholders, there's some still old, gray-bearded, bald-headed old people out there, kind of like me, stakeholders, that don't believe in this. Still some out there. They need to retire. Like me, I need to retire. Anyway. Unclear relationships about how people get assigned to you, an untrained leader. One of the biggest things is not only having the guy or girl that's in charge of this integrated team that knows how to run one properly, but you need to invest some time up front and train the team members on how to be an effective integrated team. How many folks here served on an integrated team where at the first meeting you got trained on how to participate as an integrated product team? I don't see one hand. Okay. It takes a little bit of training, all right? This elusive thing called consensus, where I hear you and I understand what you're saying. You've heard me, you understand what I'm saying. We obviously disagree on something. However, we can agree on this one course of action that we can both live with and we'll move forward. That's basically consensus, okay? So that's hard to do sometimes. It takes a little bit of time to do it and a little bit of skill. All those others are pretty much, common sense. But they happen. They happen all the time. Some things I've found that have worked. You can't have more than 2 people in charge. The contracting officer and the PM, okay? I always put the contracting officer up there on the same level as the PM. You got to, okay? Written chart of the, well, let's go back. The contracting officer is in charge of the contract. PM's in charge of the program, okay? That's all part about accepting accountability as well, and that's on that list. You got to know where you're going, clear goals. You got to know what success looks like. You got to have some metrics, okay? Include your contractors if it's appropriate. If you're already on a contract and you're in a very much of a contracting officer representative sort of a core-like function going on, bring your contractor into these IPTs, okay? You got to be able to manage conflict. When you bring integrated teams together, the work gets done by people, okay? Bottom line. The work gets done by people. People are diverse. They bring different attitudes. They bring different skills. They bring different cultures. They bring different beliefs. They bring this mixed bag of personalities and stuff into your integrated team, and now you're mixing and matching all of that together. Believe me, you're going to have some conflict, okay? And a good trained IPT leader knows how to manage the conflict, because out of conflict, I have found, comes innovation, all right? Out of conflict comes innovation if you know how to manage it properly. Tailored empowerment, talked a little bit about that one. And it's really still best, even in this virtual day and age, to do things face-to-face. Your IPT members should come together and sit across from the table, eyeball to eyeball. That's still really the best way to get things done quickly and efficiently, okay? Yeah, you can get a lot done virtually. You can conduct meetings using Adobe Connect, video teleconferencing, you can do a whole lot of stuff. But to really get the good product churned out in the least amount of time, least amount of cost, and not waste everybody's time doing it, is really to come together every now and then, at least face-to-face, okay? Critical thinking. That's been a resurgent topic as well in a lot of these symposiums. We need to go back to what critical thinking is all about, and people need to get trained in how to think critically in order to be good IPT members. I like to define critical thinking as you have to track this statement. You have to track this statement very closely. It's thinking about your thinking while you are thinking so that your thinking is going to be better. In other words, you have an internal mechanism that's checking yourself on how well I'm actually thinking here, so that when I think about similar topics in the future, I will think about them in a better way or a more critical way. It's kind of like an internal compass. It takes a little bit of time and experience to get that ability, okay? So thinking about your thinking while you're thinking so your thinking will be better. That's critical thinking. And of course, time management. Don't waste people's time. Use things that save time, like agendas, written agendas. Start on time, end on time, that sort of thing. Very simple, but it's also very powerful. And I'm going to let my colleague come up and, like I said, hopefully blast me out of the water with a lot of stuff.
Perfect introduction now. Okay, I am Tim Whalen. I am the Career Manager for Project and Program Management and Information Technology at the Department of Homeland Security. We just had a dynamic team form to solve a problem on a quick thing, implementing a change that was unplanned for. Agile does that all the time. One thing that I will key off a few things that Bruce brought up before I start. And he told you that this IPT concept came out of the Japanese auto industry, adopted to the weapon systems within DoD. And let's talk a little bit about what the difference is between information technology and those kind of manufacturing processes. When Toyota builds a car, do they build one? And when we build a fighter jet or a missile, do we build one? When there's a part that's wrong with Chrysler, can they distribute that over an internet patch and fix it overnight? They have to plan and hopefully design. They get a great benefit from fixing their design up front and getting economies of scale from producing 1,000 or 1,000,000 units, or preventing the need to make constant changes after the fact. The IT industry is completely opposite. They go on the fact that software is never done. Anybody still using the same version of Microsoft Word that they used in the early 90s? Still the same product. It's still a word processor. It's changed countless amounts of times since then. Windows itself, the operating system that you use, is the same kind of way. Change is constantly embraced within the within the IT sector, less so than in the hardware manufacturing sector. So, traditional versus agile. So said in the auto, in the weapon system, there's this big giant process where they get the design up front. They want to make sure that everything is correct so that when they build 1,000 cars or 1,000 missiles, that they don't have to have a great big giant logistical support tail to make changes after the fact. Agile, on the other hand, embraces the fact that we're going to have change. We all made the assumption that my presentation was going to go off without a hitch, was already here and everything like that. We quickly responded to change and got things going so that we could do that. Change is a matter of life. It is embraced by the IT sector, and even if it's something old. Bruce, my bow tie is back in style because of somebody from a TV show that's been running for 50 years. Doctor Who made bow ties better, back in fashion again. All he had to do is say bow ties are cool, and now everybody thinks they are, and all the hipsters have embraced it. So now everything comes back. In the IT sector is the same thing. We had things that we had planned for originally. If you've been around long enough, they used to have these things called client-server computers where mainframes would do all the storage and all. That got expensive and time-consuming because the biggest cost involved was this telecommunications link and paying for storage remotely. So supply and demand kicked in, and things changed, and everybody went to local storage, and things got faster. And now we're talking about cloud. What is cloud? It's back in centralized storage and things like that to get economies of scale on things like security and storage and things, so that we don't have to maintain that locally. A lot of things go cyclically, but those changes come very, very rapidly. And if you try to plan 5 years out in a big life cycle style change here, you're not going to be able to respond to those. Agile, on the other hand, counts on the fact that we're going to have small iterations that we're going to constantly put out. So we're not talking about a year of design. We're talking about design integrated with production and testing all at once so that you can release in 1 month or 6 months. The federal CIO is pushing for releases no more than 6 months. They want to see Agile wants to push towards more and more frequent releases. So how do you write contracts to that? How do you design for and test that? Can you have quarterly meetings if you're releasing things every month? Probably not. So you got to change your thought processes. Integrated product team definitions, and I stole some of Bruce's slides here. Same kind of tenets still apply. You want a multidisciplinary team focused on the product, and you want all the cross-functional areas, and you want those people empowered to make those decisions. But what you're working on isn't necessarily something that's focused on a more long-term goal. You're probably looking more on the shorter term. Are you working on a hardware solution or a networking solution now? Are you putting out a software patch? Are you doing the same thing, constantly developing more software in an enterprise system? The team that you pull together may be very dynamic depending upon what you're on, and you want to be able to flex and respond to that. Contracting personnel, initially may not like this because they might have to have a lot more involvement or a lot more frequent changes to contracts than they would normally be expected. Part of that is the contract choices that they may try to use. A firm fixed price contract may not work unless it's very, very creatively worded in what your delivery is. But in all aspects, what ends up happening is that there needs to be more involvement and more frequent involvement by all the parties involved. And as Bruce was saying, to include the contractor, it's not just encouraged, it really is a necessity. It is more, Agile focuses on a partnership versus a process. So the Agile Manifesto, and this kind of goes along those lines, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We're really trying to get the interactions to occur, and just as Bruce had said, face-to-face is the best way to do that. And a working product, it says working software up here, but Agile is being more and more used beyond just software from when it was originally crafted. So I would say working product over comprehensive documentation. In the DoD model and in the auto industry, things along those lines, a lot of the stuff is focused on let's get all these processes and everything documented and settled up front. Agile is more along the lines of let's get what we have out there and then we'll document how it ends up working or how it works to meet our problem versus guessing at what we think we want and then having it come out that way after, having to change it afterwards. You want to incorporate that change into the design as you're making it. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This comes down to, and this is what I was saying, the contract choice that you make for an Agile development effort is very different from those that you would choose for delivering a dozen widgets or anything along those lines. It may not be a fixed price contract, may not be the best choice because that fixed price contract does not allow the flexibility that Agile is encouraging to ensure that everything comes out successfully. So responding to change over following a plan goes also into the dynamic nature of what you want your team to be able to do. Bruce had mentioned empowerment. In some aspects, the original concepts of empowerment were empowerment to enforce or ensure that you're following a plan. This is, you're empowering the people to respond to changes when you see that the plan probably wasn't where you wanted to go in the first place. So the highest priority is always customer satisfaction. Agile really still has its roots in that quality, in the quality items that Bruce had mentioned that come from the Japanese industry. It found that if we fixed only on processes, we were losing some of the quality because we weren't allowing the change that was necessary to come into place. Short time frames and frequent delivery. Like I said, that's one of the biggest hurdles that we have in the government that we have to learn how to do. It's both on the contract side and on the budget side. Do most of you have a good experience trying to change a contract or change a budget in the government? It's usually very lengthy processes that we have involved in establishing those. So when I worked on an Agile program, that was one of the big things, was how do we change and report our progress towards that. The teams that are involved in managing an Agile program have those same hurdles. Every agency out there has to figure out how they're going to do that until we as the federal government decide, here's how we're going to change so that we can have our budgets and our contracts come out to better support Agile development efforts. So some of the key potential differences that you get when you have a traditional IPT versus an Agile IPT, as I said, is the frequency, format, and focus of the meetings. In Agile, everything's about change and everything's about your current delivery cycle, which is going to be on a much shorter duration. You're talking about what you're going to do in the next month versus what you're going to be doing to prepare for a staged delivery based upon the acquisition life cycle. So you're talking about a sprint or a release, which may be 1 month or 3 or 4 months in length versus 6 months or a year or more. Okay? The membership, as I said, can be very, very dynamic. You want to identify all the partners that you're going to have involved in your project or program, but your IPT membership can be somewhat flexible because you want empowered members that are involved. You want to make sure that the people are engaged and empowered when they come to the meetings. So if you're not working on certain aspects at the time, if you're not involving network personnel or anything at that time, you may be able to just have your software developers, your software development folks, and your customers and your contracting officer involved in your IPT if that's what's getting affected at the time. You may switch that based upon what you're delivering at the time versus having a tendency towards a larger group meeting that might occur if you're trying to plan for all aspects in your IPT. Okay. I mentioned it a couple of times already, the level of involvement of contracting personnel has to increase under Agile, especially if there's less flexibility in the contract type that's issued, then there has to be more involvement by the contract personnel because more changes or task orders or anything like that are going to be a necessary part, once again, depending upon how the contract is written. OFPP has put out guidance on modular contracting. Taking advantage of those gives a little more flexibility. But the level of involvement of contracting personnel is definitely increased and is more frequent. Okay. Risk management within Agile teams. One thing that you start to get into is timing of personnel transitions. Agile really focuses on tight bonds between personnel to make sure that you're working together throughout. Best to try to time personnel transitions at sprints and releases so that the transition occurs naturally versus, so you have more gaps, more shorter durations so that you're able to make personnel changes, but you want to make sure that those don't interfere with the work that's being done mid-cycle. You want to interface early and often with the enterprise and infrastructure providers to make sure that the projects that are being conducted in this way interface with the larger picture because you inherently in most Agile projects, you're inheriting things from either the enterprise or the IT architecture folks, and you want to make sure that those are integrated into the planning. You never, even though you're working on a smaller scale and you're delivering smaller pieces, Agile development teams never lose sight of the bigger picture. So they need to constantly refocus that and make sure that when in between sprints that they're looking at the priorities that have been established from above. Okay? And this goes across both sets of IPTs. Commitment and buy-in from project governance is always necessary to ensure that the teams are successful. Okay? We are ready for questions.
Questions?
Hi, one of the slides spoke to if your IPT, you don't have maybe either the best person or maybe folks who have the experience that you need. How do you go about maybe either transitioning, trading, or going about getting those folks that you really need in your IPT so you can have the best group possible?
It's whoever is the IPT leader, we'll call him the PM for now. PM has got to be very skilled at stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management. And if they don't manage those stakeholders actively, stakeholders may be the project sponsor. Project sponsor being the person that controls the money. The old golden rule. He who has the gold is going to rule. You manage those stakeholders so that when it comes time for that particular office to give up a competent person for your IPT, then they're usually more willing to do that because you have already worked that stakeholder relationship with them ahead of time. That's part of the PM's job. And, I came from an environment in DoD where, the PM was totally accountable for the project and the contracting officer worked for the PM. I've been in the federal sector since 2008, and I found that ain't the case, okay? Everything caters to what the contracting officer needs to get on contract, and that includes what the PM brings to the table. So the PM has got to be out there ahead of time working those stakeholder relationships to ensure that when they need the right kind of people with the right skills, that they'll get them from the stakeholder. When you have somebody show up that doesn't have the right attitude or the right skills, you either need to train them, and if they don't want to be trained, you can get rid of them. You're better off without them. That's been my experience.
Yeah. On one of the things that Agile also allows is there's a constant examination of the priorities of not only what you desire to accomplish, but what you can accomplish. And from an Agile perspective, when I was confronted with similar situations of getting the right people on at the right time, one of the things that I often did was I would look at that as part of the prioritization. Said if we thought the next most important thing happened to be functionality A, B, or C, but we couldn't get participation at that time for the product that was involved for A or B, then C might float up because it's not only what might be the highest priority, but it's the highest priority that you can accomplish within that next time window. So those might be, and in some of those cases, it might be an enterprise architecture constraint or it might be a personnel constraint. But the key is that you're flexible and that you can work around that when you're planning. Other questions? Mr. Bradley, I know you had one you talked about beforehand, so I heard you whispering over there.
You can ask anything. I'll tell you exactly what I think.
You mentioned selecting the right contract type in order to better suit Agile. What are some other ways that you can construct contracts to best suit Agile?
Yeah, it's very interesting. If you look at the modular contracting guidance that OPP put out, it basically says firm fixed price probably isn't the right choice. I have seen and heard of people doing firm fixed prices where the product delivery was actually release points calculated for a sprint. So they were creative in how they defined what was being delivered. I have been involved in a contract that was extending an enterprise or an enterprise HR system where it was a time and materials contract. I'm surprised I don't hear oohs and ahs from the contracting crowd saying how evil that is. But it worked. It worked because the government supervision was constant and working with the contractor. And also, when you put it in perspective, the time and materials contract that was being executed was very, very little of the investment, because the real investment was all the money we spent to host that system and all that money that we spent to license the COTS software that we were modifying. So we had millions and millions of dollars on a firm fixed price contract and a small amount on software modification and support that was supporting those two major contracts. When we got contracting to see that was what we were doing, they were more amenable to letting us change the contract type to do that. So making sure that the contracting officer has that big picture and seeing what all is involved and how it actually benefits the government to select a different contract type is beneficial to the PM.
More innovative ways in contracting is going to be the key to make Agile work. I mean, it's the real pressure is on the contracting officer to figure out how to decrease that cycle time of getting things on contract, keeping things on contract, and adjusting to the changes that Agile thrives on. Mm-hmm. It's just that's where the real skill transformation has got to occur.
Yeah, and a little tangent to that, but just as big, is starting the conversation with the budget personnel to say, if you're developing something in Agile, you say, we kind of want this, but we know that's not necessarily what we want, but we're going to work towards that, and we're going to deliver a bunch of stuff, but we're not going to identify exactly which pieces are going to be rolled out, over the next 5 years. Having that kind of conversation where you're making the strategic changes incrementally in Agile can be a challenge as well. And because the budget folks really want to talk in years, where the Agile folks want to talk in months or 6 months. So there are challenges in that respect as well.
I don't know too many contracting officers out there that are real tolerant when they ask you what it is you want me to put on this statement of work or statement of objective, and you say, I really don't know, but I'll know it when I see it. Nah, they're not real tolerant of words like that. But I tell you what, sometimes that's where Agile goes. You don't have all the requirements up front, and you discover a lot of stuff along the journey. It's an interesting way to do contracting based upon the federal acquisition regulation.
Tim, back to your answers about not knowing where you want. As a finance and budget person, that just kills my investment portfolio. So how do you explain that to OMB when you're set to reports out like year in advance, and also in your performance metric monthly? So that's a challenging thing for the program themselves. Yeah,
and it really comes into it is an executive level decision as to how we're going to describe what we're going to deliver, because because everything that you're doing in an Agile project, you're moving towards a big architectural vision, but as Bruce just said, or whatever, what you're delivering may very well change dramatically from start to finish based upon what you learn as you deliver it. Everything from a TSA body scanner and everything else. Those systems, what we wanted and what was delivered changed dramatically over time, and there are serious conversations, and it was listed in the CIO's 25-point plan back in 2010 that adjusting our budget processes and things to allow for that was one of the key tenets. I've seen a lot of movement on the project and program management side. I've seen stuff come out on the contracting side. I haven't seen as much on the budget side. But that budget side drives a lot of what it is. But it's that key question: is how do I report back to Congress what I've delivered? Because Congress is looking on either a 2 or a 4 or a 6-year cycle. I don't know why that is. But those just magic 2, 4, and 6-year things happen to come along. So they want to see what's delivered based upon that. You promised us this, X number of years ago, and you haven't delivered it. Whereas when they gave us that, we didn't really know what we wanted. It was a problem. We knew we wanted to attack it, but circumstances have changed since then. So we have to be better about being able to explain that. It's probably going to take more frequent updates. It's going to take, the budget cycle is going to have to get more agile itself. And so that is a challenge.
Congress isn't an agile organization. They are very linear, like I said. Getting into the president's budget every year, if the federal agencies, it's very linear. It's linear driven. It's driven by the calendar. And what we're saddled with are still very institutionalized linear ways of thinking, not just with the budget, but with how agencies generate their requirements for new equipment, new systems, new services, and also how we manage them. If you look at any agency's acquisition directive, if they have one, you'll still see very linear thinking in phases and milestones as they divide up this project up into its pieces. How do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat it a bite at a time. So, that's still very linear thinking. We've been taught that, trained that, practiced that for a long, long time. And now suddenly shifting this big switch over to something that old guys like me thinks is just loosey-goosey, like agile. That's hard to do. It really is. I have seen the benefits of that process. I have seen it work. I have seen great value delivered to the government through agile processes. But it's still hard to change the culture, okay? It's still hard to change the culture. You've got to be receptive to the change.